welcome back to He Heals Podcast. My name is Rachel Alyse, and on He Heals Podcast, you will hear encouraging testimonies and messages that will point you back to Christ, as well as some practical advice for you in your healing journey. Now, today, I am so excited because I have another friend, Tristen Ross. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me here
Yeah.
today. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So for those that don't know, Tristen is a marriage and family therapist.
Yes.
There's a lot of acronyms. When I was like, looking up all the details, I was like, just tell me what to say. But I thought it would be a good idea to have, because, well, let me backtrack. On Heals podcast, we talk a lot about mental health. I share a lot about my own mental health journey.
Yeah.
And I thought it would be a good idea to have an actual licensed therapist on so that we can get some insight, dig a little deeper into some concepts, because in this day and age on social media, we're getting a lot of like mental health content, and I'm here for it. Like,
Yeah.
I love it. I love that, we can talk about these things openly, but there are some concepts where I'm like, man, like I just really want some clarity, but I also want to dig deeper.
Yeah.
So thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Man, we'll just get straight to it. So first, will you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you decided to become a therapist?
Oh man. So for me, what people don't know is that when I started school, I was going for a biology pre-med.
I didn't know that.
That's what I went to school for.
Oh.
That's what I applied to California Baptist University for.
Shout out.
And as I was going through that, like I really had a hard time. And I realized that when I applied and started in biology was because my family wanted me to be as Nigerians, like they had specific, like culturally, like you were either a doctor, a lawyer, all the things.
Yeah.
And it just wasn't like I did not feel it. And my junior year undergrad, I decided to switch to behavioral science.
Wow.
And I remember having a conversation with my mom, like, Mom, I remember going to Denny's and sitting with her, and I was like, Mom, this is just like not for me. Like, I feel like I'm having a really hard time there. And so I decided to go into behavioral science, and I fell in love. Like my first psychology class, I was just in awe of just like the mind, the body. And I'm like, wow, like I love this. And just being able to then ultimately go into grad school and just realizing that there was just so much for myself just to be able to label and like put things, like actually put language to what I've been feeling my entire life. And just with my family background and just traumas that I had experienced. And also remembering like being in high school and like helping out my friends, like when they would tell me stuff and being like, okay, let's talk about it. Like what's going on. And just always being an encourager and support, and being a therapist just fit all the things that I desire to do, just to be able to help people. Like I feel like whenever I would be asked growing up, like, what do you want to do when you grow up? I was just like, I just want to help people. And though like going into biology, I would have been able to help people physically, but I felt like there was just so much more to be able to walk through a journey of healing with someone just was something that I truly just enjoy. And to wake up every morning and go to work and know that I'm going to have 8 people sitting on the couch with me or across from me. And knowing that whatever they bring into that room, we can dig into those stuff. Like to me, that's truly what my calling is. And that's what I have just fell in love with. And grad school helped me being able to even just try it out.
Yeah.
And it's also just even allowed me to also do my own healing work, because when you start talking to people, half of the time I feel like I come home and I'm like, I was sitting across from someone that literally had the same exact story.
Wow.
And to be able to walk through with them, and then God just illuminate some things for me and be like, Tristan, yeah, go deal with your anger. Like, Tristan, go deal with jealousy, go deal with envy, go deal with your childhood trauma and like where your triggers are coming from. Like, and so I think that has been really helpful for me, just to be able to sit across people and just hear their story. And so, yeah, that's why I ended up becoming a therapist, and I love it, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world.
I
Yeah.
love that. Well, if you haven't heard this lately, thank you for what you do. I know I've had some like really great therapists in my life that I'm so grateful for. So
Yeah.
thank you for going through all that, all your training, and just wanting to genuinely just help people.
Yeah, no. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So what exactly do you do now?
Okay. So currently I background I worked a little bit in treatment, which is for substance use as
Mm-hmm.
well as mental health. And so I worked a little bit in treatment for adolescents who struggled with mental health and also substance use in a residential setting. And that was for about 4 or 5 years. I went from adolescents and then transitioned to working with adults. And now I currently work at a private practice in Riverside. It's an office in Riverside and Marietta. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of in between both. And I just get to meet with individuals, families, couples, which I am starting to enjoy working with couples, which I would not say was something on my top. I
Yeah.
was like, I will work with kids, teenagers,
Uh-huh.
and adults, but couples, good Lord, that's two people in the room. I don't know if I could do all that. But
Mm-hmm.
now it's like, I genuinely love just seeing couples come in and they're broken at the beginning. I mean, we're all broken. Um, but just to see the healing process and see a couple reconcile and now are at a better place, that's
Yeah.
just such a beautiful space to be in. So I currently work at a private practice and in Riverside and Marietta. And hopefully
Nice.
eventually we'll have my own private practice. God
I
willing.
love that.
God willing.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, like I said, I'm glad you're here
Hmm.
because there are some concepts that and words that get thrown around a lot on social media,
Yeah.
and um, not that people use them loosely, but
Hmm.
I would just like some clarity for those that don't know. Maybe they're in the beginning stages of a mental health journey. Maybe they're just starting to become self-aware of like, oh shoot, I need healing. But like, what exactly does this mean? Like,
Hmm.
there's some words and I'm like, what does this mean?
Yeah.
So like, the first one I want to talk about is inner work or
Mm.
deep work. Because
Hmm.
when I hear that, I think when I first hear it, I'm like, what does that mean? Like, what is inner work? So, can you elaborate on that for us?
Yeah, so you're so right. I feel like just now, like we get to go on social media and everybody is throwing some words out, and you're
Mm-hmm.
like, what the heck? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know what all of that is. But when it comes to inner work and deep work, it's truly just as simple as that. Inner work and deep work is really for you to sit back and truly reflect inward on what are the things, what have I gone through? What are my emotional triggers? What are my psychological triggers? What are the things
Mm,
that I've experienced in my life that I've just compartmentalized my whole entire life, and now I'm getting a chance to really look internally and
yeah.
see what are the parts of me that really does still need healing, right? And a lot of times we go through childhoods and then become adults, and a lot of us are walking around, we're adults with really wounded inner childs.
Mm,
And so for us to be able to actually take a moment to say, hey, I really need to pause, look inward. What are the things that subconsciously I've just gotten so accustomed to now doing, and or sometimes don't even know I'm doing.
right.
And now I'm taking a look inward and being able to say, like, I really do need to do this work. So just honestly, and inner work and deep work is really you just looking inside.
Yeah.
Truly, like we're always doing things outwardly. It's easy for us to see all of our wounds outward, but no one really
Mm-hmm.
wants to look internally, because that would really bring up a lot of things that we've just been really good at compartmentalizing. So
Yeah.
a simple answer for that is just like your inner work and your deep work is really you taking the time to really get to know you,
Mm-hmm.
and not with everybody else's input about it, but of course with the clinician sitting across from you and asking you the right question, you get to dig deep and see what it is that you really do need to start working on.
Yeah. I think a good way that kind of helped my understanding is when I heard someone describe it as like, often a lot of people, and myself included for a good majority of my life, have been running on autopilot. Like,
Mhm.
we don't even know. Like, I didn't even realize I had an anger issue like that because that was just normal, or that was,
Yeah.
my family we grew up in, like that's just how we talk to each other. Or, like, this is what
Mm.
we just did, and so yeah, like for a good part of my life, I just found myself running on autopilot, and it wasn't until I did that inner work, looking like, okay, wait, and becoming self aware
Yeah.
that real healing can begin. So
Mhm.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Next topic, and I feel like this one does get thrown around a lot, by myself included. Can you explain what exactly is a trigger?
Oh, a trigger.
Mm-hmm.
Trigger warning.
Right?
Everywhere triggers.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, triggers are really just how would I put it? They are more of like like stimuli that just causes a reaction.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, if someone steps on my shoe, right? And I get really upset. I'm like, "Oh, wow, they just triggered me because they stepped on." It's not that they stepped on my shoe that's really triggering, cuz it could have been an accident.
Yeah.
But does it feel like this person is violating my space? And
Mm.
I've had multiple experiences in the past where my space has been violated. So even when someone does something as simple as step on my shoe accidentally, I internalize that as you intentionally did that. And that's me creating a
Mm.
narrative now. So every time someone does anything that is not even intentional, I have personalized that as, okay, now that's a trigger for me. And so then we go around throwing it like, okay, you're triggering me. You're triggering me. It's like, no. Why is this particular thing continuously stirring up
Yeah.
this like anger and frustration? And so for me, that's when it comes to just that word trigger, it is a simple word that people have just began to throw around, but has a lot of meaning
Yeah.
for different people. Because my triggers are different from your triggers, right? And even for just a personal example, is that I've had moments where I would say when you shared about anger,
Mm-hmm.
I realized that anger for me has always been an internal thing. I
Mm.
never want to explode outwardly. And so there are things that when I see people around me, whether they're putting someone down, that's a huge, like it stirs a
Mm.
lot of stuff inside of me.
Mm-hmm.
But when I see people putting other people down, I realize for the longest time, I'm like, why does this bother me so much?
Yeah.
Like, why am I getting just like, like, I feel almost like a heat, just like kind of like go a wave of heat around over my body. And I realized that was a trigger for me because it reminds me so many times of growing up where my mom will say something to me and although her intention was not to hurt me, there are things that she would say that would still stick with me. And so growing
Mm-hmm.
up as an adult, because I did not deal with those things and I've ignored those things,
Mm.
now when other people do things like that to me, it does trigger me.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that's kind of just a simple definition of what a trigger is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I feel like when people do throw out like oh like they're triggering me, like you're triggering me, all that stuff. We're just throwing it out as an excuse of like this is upsetting me and I'm just going to stay upset with when really and tell me if I'm explaining this incorrectly,
Hmm.
like the trigger is actually supposed to be a signal to yourself saying, "Hey, this is stirring something in me and
Hmm.
I need to figure out why."
Yeah.
Because maybe it's something small as like, "Oh, you stepped on my shoe." That shouldn't be a big deal, but like let me dig deeper into
Hmm.
why. And
Hmm.
so trigger shouldn't be an excuse, but it should actually be like a signal of like, "Hey, like let me figure out what's going on here."
And it's usually a signal for you to really get to do your work.
Yeah.
Like how we talked about like the inner work, when those little things pop up, it's now if it's a compound of these things that continue to happen and you continue to have this reaction
Mm-hmm.
to it, then it's time for you to take a step back and really truly look inward and say, okay, why is this really happening? Like I knew that I experienced a lot of times where I would internalize anger.
Mm.
And in me internalizing anger, I did not know how that was impacting people around me, or even especially once you get married, it even is more just magnified. And
Mm.
so I had to really look at those things. So triggers, yes, it's not something we need to throw around, just like other mental health diagnoses are not things that we need to throw around often, because that could be very hurtful. We don't know what that truly means for someone.
Yeah.
And just a little bit too, if when people even throw around the word of like, oh, that person is so bipolar. There's
Mm.
so much to that than
Yeah.
just saying like that person is because their mood shifts just day and night. No, that's not what it looks like. There are
Right.
people who actually struggle with this diagnoses. And so when we throw it around, it does impact those people who
Yeah.
actually are daily waking up and having to go through the process of healing
Mm-hmm.
in that. So yeah, triggers are also not something we need to like throw around all the all the time, or just like you said, even use as an excuse, because I've also seen that it's where it's like, oh, that's just so triggering to me. Well, if I'm constantly, every time there's conflict, and I constantly state that conflict is triggering for me as my way to avoid actually addressing conflict,
Mm,
then how am I really going to move past that?
yeah.
And am I going to see every conflict? Because there's also such thing as healthy conflict. So
Mm-hmm.
am I always looking at all conflict as something negative? Or can I actually look at them as there's also something positive in this?
Yeah.
It's an opportunity for me to grow or
Yeah.
learn how to hold myself accountable, because we don't want to hold ourselves accountable. That's why all things trigger us, because we
Mm-hmm.
don't want to hold ourselves accountable for certain things
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned a couple of words that I'm like, ooh, okay. Like I kind of want to touch on that. You said healthy conflict. Like that's
Hmm.
a real thing. And I think for me growing up, like I just wanted to avoid all conflict. Like
Hmm.
because conflict, what it looked like in my family, not to just call everyone on blast, but like it always went down this like bad road of like, okay, we're just yelling and screaming at each other and we're not
Hmm.
going to get to any sort of resolution. So like, yeah, can you explain the difference and what, like, how can we strive towards healthy conflict? What even is healthy
Hmm.
conflict?
And so I think this is good, right?
Yeah.
Healthy conflict is kind of being able to identify your feelings, like separating my feelings from the actual situation.
Mm,
And so, for example, if we're in a conflict, we're in an argument about something, a lot of times it's like, you're doing this, you're doing that. The blaming comes into full effect when it's like, well, you did that because you did that. It causes me to do this. And it's like, okay,
mm,
well, hold up, pause. What were you feeling in that particular, what are your emotions? Identify your own emotions. And so
mm-hmm.
if I'm able to identify, like, you know what, Rachel, I felt very frustrated when you missed our dinner date the other
Mm,
day,
mm-hmm.
and you didn't even contact me to let me know that you would be late. I felt really frustrated.
Yeah.
Rather than me being like, you show up to the dinner, Rachel, Rachel's here. Okay, girl. Okay. What? Just making passive comments
Mm,
versus actually addressing it and being like, you know what, Rachel, I'm just really frustrated
yeah.
with what you did. So to have healthy conflict is one, like identify what your emotions are using I statements. Those are a real thing. You use I
Mm-hmm.
statement, because if I can use I statement, now I'm identifying my role in this and not just putting the blame all on you. Now I can be able to actually express to you where I'm at and welcome you, or sometimes even just invite you into that journey of like, hey, I'm really frustrated. Can we sit and have a conversation and come to a resolution, or even come to a compromise? And so now you can even let me know, like, here are my boundaries
Yeah.
of when you do these things. Like, here are my boundaries. And that's how we are able to communicate. And
Mm-hmm.
when we try to have healthy conflict versus you did this and now I'm upset, have a huge blowout. We don't talk for months versus I can actually just express to you what my emotions are, how I'm feeling,
Yeah.
and we can come to a resolution.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. It's like you are allowed to feel your feelings and be angry, upset, whatever the situation is,
Hmm.
but that does not give you an excuse to treat someone poorly because of it. Like and
Listen.
that's how we can get to the place of where we have healthy conflict in our relationships, when we take the time to process, like, okay, yeah,
Hmm.
this was upsetting and let me process it for a moment,
Hmm.
and then with respect, love and respect, because I care about this person, I care about our relationship, discuss it in a respectful manner.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think when we don't do that, we can really hurt people.
Mm,
When we don't actually take a moment. And sometimes it's even okay in conflict to take a pause. Like with couples that I work with that are high conflict, I I know we use this when we were kids. Timeouts are still effective for adults.
uh-huh.
I have to take a timeout and say, you know what? I need a break. I need to take in that timeout. I'm taking this time to jot down or just even just take an inventory, a personal inventory of what I'm feeling. Why did this bother me? is this because of what they did that triggered me, or is this just stuff that I'm holding on to that I haven't processed with them from the past that I've
Mm-hmm.
compiled up, and now I have this bookshelf of all the wrongs that they've done to me
Mm-hmm.
versus the actual current situation.
Yeah.
Like, this is an argument we're having right now about something that just happened, and even focusing on the present, because a lot of times we like to bring in the past to be like, well, remember when you did this to me back in
Mm-hmm.
high school? No. How does that actually impact this present conflict?
Yeah.
And how can we process this present
Yeah.
conflict in general? Yeah.
Oof. We're just getting started, and this is good already. Oh my gosh. Okay, let's move on to the next topic. So, I feel like this one can be also vague and like, what the heck does this mean? But what does healing your inner child mean?
Mm.
And maybe like, can you give some examples of like what that could look like?
Yeah. So I think that a lot of times when we hear about our inner child, it's really, I think we try to separate it, but we don't necessarily know that our inner child is actually just parts of our childhood, or just even parts of ourself
Mm-hmm.
that have not necessarily been taking the time to, what we talked about before, inner work, to fully heal.
Yeah.
So for example, I can look at an individual who will come into therapy at 45 and is sharing with me that every time I go to my mom's house for dinner or for Thanksgiving dinner, and mom starts asking me about like my recipe, or starts judging me about why my food doesn't taste good, automatically I shrink.
Mm.
And so I would ask, usually in working with a client like that, I would have them usually draw a timeline. I love timelines, they're
Mm.
so helpful. Create a timeline. And as you create that timeline, I want you to go through, when are moments where mom was judgmental towards you that really impacted you? When was the
Mm.
first time you remembered? And so we go back to that particular time, and we go, and as adults, how can I help? How can I meet the need of that? Let's say at 15 years old, you remember the first time you baked a cookie and mom judged that the salt was too much in it and it was
Mm.
not great. And
Mm-hmm.
so now at 45, even when you go home, you're super self conscious of what you're bringing. And so the inner child is at 15, where it doesn't necessarily mean that your inner child is this 2-year old, 3-year old. It could be, but it's
Mm.
also 15-year-old part of you. What's a
Yeah.
15-year-old self that has never healed from mom's judgment about her cookies? So
Mm-hmm.
now she goes through her whole life walking around with shame and a lot of judgment and internal critic of herself in everything that she does. Everything that she does, she's very critical. And when she looks back, it all stemmed from 15-year-old self not really fully healing. And as
Mm-hmm.
an adult, when you do your inner child work, is this adult creating a safe space for 15-year-old Rachel, 15-year-old Tristen to say, you know what? I know that you really needed mom to just affirm you. And I'm here to affirm you and let you know that it is okay.
Yeah.
It is safe for you to be here with me now, and know that I love you, and know that I'm here for you, and know that I'm going to encourage you. And that's where the healing work is, and that is just being able to invite that part of you, the wounded part of you,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to say, this is a safe space now
Yeah.
that I'm ready to welcome you.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that like fully answers
Yeah.
inner child, but yeah, that's kind of what an inner child work would look like, and
Yeah.
what a wounded inner child.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we have our inner child, because a lot of us, we have wounded inner childs that were never healed. And so that's part of doing the deep work and the inner work too, is that you will end up working on your inner child, because a lot of our hurt stems from our childhood. A lot of our
Mm-hmm.
hurt stems from things that our parents did unknowingly in their way of doing the best that they could.
Yeah.
We still were hurt.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that they weren't great parents. And sometimes we have to like remind our parents, like, I know you did the best that you could, but as an adult looking back, this part of my childhood, I was really hurt.
Yeah.
And I really wish that you would have been there. So now I take the responsibility as an adult to
Mm-hmm.
provide for my inner child what my parent couldn't do for me,
Mm-hmm.
because we take on that responsibility
Yeah.
once we start doing our healing
Yeah.
work.
No, that's huge. And that's a big word right there, responsibility.
Yes.
Because I think that was something that I struggled with in doing the inner work and healing my inner child is I was holding on to resentment
Mm.
for, my parents. Like, man, if only they talked to me this way, if only they worded it this way, if only they showed up in this way. And the truth is, as an adult, like, I am responsible for
Yep.
my own healing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and they were doing the best that they could with the best knowledge that they had,
Yeah.
and I'm privileged to grow up in this time where we can talk about mental health in this way, but it is not their fault
Mm.
for my own wounds, and it is my responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
That part right there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no. And I even thought about this as you were sharing that is sometimes we forget that we are all born into this world broken.
Mm-hmm.
Every single person, our brokenness is not unique.
Right.
Like we are all broken. We came into this world broken, but now our healing, our purpose, our calling, and all of those things are our responsibility. Now that is unique because your healing process looks different from my healing
Mm-hmm.
process, but it's so unique to who I am. And that's the beauty of who we are in God too. Like we get to heal those parts of us if we acknowledge that there is a wound.
Yeah.
You can't just ignore that, okay, I have resentment and you continue on with life, but never really deal with it. And now you get to pass it on to your kids because
Mm-hmm.
now you start seeing things in your kids. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's because we didn't do our own work. Like if you go do your
Yes.
own work, you won't show up to your kids angry and yelling at them for what? Like, but do you remember when your mom was yelling at you? What was the feeling that you felt when she was yelling? And now you're giving that, you're passing that. It's almost like a gift that we're giving to our kids. Like it's not a gift. Now they have to do work because you didn't take the time to do your own
Yes.
work.
I am excited because this is actually leading me to the next topic that I wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
Can we talk about generational trauma?
Oh, generational trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so just kind of definition wise, like generational traumas are are experiences that are passed through generations, just
Mm-hmm.
as it is.
Mm-hmm.
I used to will interchangeably say like intergenerational trauma, right? Trauma that was experienced from maybe we have grandpa going to war and then things such as like PTSD. There are mental health illnesses that also can be passed through generationally. So you have people when they come in, I will always ask in my biopsychosocial, which is what we do when people come into therapy.
Mm-hmm.
We want to get to know you a little bit, get to know like the social aspect and the psychological aspect of why you're here today. And when we do that, I usually will ask, like, is there any history of family mental illness in your family? And majority of the time when people come in and they are diagnosed with depression or anxiety, it has shown up throughout their family line. Is sometimes they were just not aware of it. So intergenerational trauma is simply traumas, childhood traumas that are passed through. And one that is huge that I'm glad that has been really talked about more is such events such as sexual abuse,
Mm.
right? We have a mother who won't tell her daughter that she also experienced sexual trauma in her childhood or just in her life. And because of that, because we're not necessarily talking about these traumatic experiences in our family or these things that have been passed down, we leave our children open to not knowing and moving through life with lack of awareness of what has gone on in the family.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are just things that whether it's childhood trauma, abuse, we see like alcoholism. When you look at an individual that struggles with alcoholism and they have a history of men in their life that have experienced alcoholism, but it's not necessarily talked about, so we don't think that it's a problem. But there's a lot of things that are problems in our household that we just do not talk about, which ends up
Mm.
being passed out to our kids. And we now see parents fighting for the life of their kids that are struggling with alcoholism because it was
Yeah.
never really something that was talked about. Because some of
Mm-hmm.
us might have grown up in a household whereas whatever happens in here stays in here. And so
Mm-hmm.
because of that, we don't necessarily talk about these patterns in our
Yeah.
household.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that I love about like our generations and the
Mm-hmm.
generations coming up is that we are talking about these things. We are
Yeah.
having these conversations. We are going to therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And now we can be empowered to say, like, hey, like literally everyone, this is a real one for me. Everyone in my in my family has struggled with anxiety.
Mm.
And I'm saying no more. Like, it's
No.
going to end with me. I am not passing this on.
Yeah.
And we get to be empowered now. And so
Mhm.
I'm so grateful for the time that we
Yeah.
are living in right now.
As you were even sharing about, like, I love when you stated that with our generation, like this generation, we're like looking at it and we're actually talking about it. And it
Mm-hmm.
just, even for me and my family, actually, on my dad's side of the family, we have a lot of like severe mental health diagnosis. So
Mm.
my uncle is diagnosed schizophrenia, um, schizophrenic, and my grandmother, I believe, actually was a schizophrenic bipolar type, and my
Mm.
dad is diagnosed with bipolar. And so for me, I have to be very aware, like I have to pay attention to a lot of my behaviors as well that could possibly be presenting those diagnoses. And for a long time I was really fearful of actually putting name to it. And I
Mm.
think a lot of times it's like, there's power in life and death in your tongue. And I'm like, but there's also genetics. And so
Mm.
I also have to be mindful.
Yeah.
And so recognizing those things, I think it's great for us to be aware. Um, yes, when we look at our the traumas in our family or just generationally what we've experienced, we have to also be very aware of those things so that we can be able to start working on those things. So now knowing that I have these severe mental illness diagnosis in my family, I have to be aware so that I can be mindful of what are some behaviors that I'm noticing in my
Mm.
lifetime that's like, okay, I need to let my husband in on this and be like, yes, there are possibilities that these are diagnoses that are in my family. So I
Mm-hmm.
just want to let you know, if you notice something in my behavior that I might not be aware of, let me know so
Yeah.
that I can also bring this forward to my therapist. As a therapist, I see a therapist. So you don't think that we're just telling you to go to therapy just for you to be in therapy, because even as clinician, it is actually mandatory when we are going through our grad program to actually have 24 hours of therapy.
I
So
didn't even
you
know
have to
that.
actually sign up for therapy to be a therapist so that we know what we're talking about.
Well, that's reassuring.
And so so I have to go to my therapist and bring this up to my therapist and be like, hey, these are things that are also in my family. And just wanting to make sure that, do
Mm-hmm.
you notice this in my behavior
Yeah.
so that I can be aware? And if I need to go and have medication, is that something that I also need to be aware of as well?
Yeah.
And so I just think that, yeah, I love that this generation, like we are actually eager and willing to actually learn about our family dynamics and learning
Mm-hmm.
about generational traumas in our family and even being able to speak up about generational trauma, because that's something that keeps us bound when we don't speak. Like, and there's so much freedom when you can actually verbalize
Yeah.
and say, hey, you know what, there is a lineage in my family of anxiety. Like, now it stops with me. There is power, just because we also speak that there's power, and like, it stops with me, but I'm actually doing the work. It doesn't just stop with you
Mm.
because you're like, it stops with me. Like, let's just go from there. It's like, it stops with me, and I'm actually taking practical steps to
Mm-hmm.
actually develop a healthier mental health.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. I appreciate your transparency in
Yeah.
here. Um, but yeah, like when we say inner work, when we say deep work, it is work. Like it is actual work. Like we're not
Hmm.
just talking the talk. Like it's hard work.
Yeah,
And
it is.
so, man, if you're going through it, we are with you. Our hearts are for you.
No,
Um,
really. Seriously,
yeah.
our hearts are for you, and it is hard, and I
Yeah.
don't ever want to dismiss the experience that you're in wherever you're at in your journey of healing. It's
Mm-hmm.
just, take your time, but as long as you're being authentic and honest with yourself about where you're at and really fully being ready to dig into the dirt, like, but
Mm-hmm.
and that's the beauty of going to a clinician, is that they're willing to go in the mud with you.
Yeah.
They're able to like dig in the mud with you, and then there are times where the clinician has to step out and be like, okay, now look at this. Like, what's going on? What do you identify? We
Mm-hmm.
empower you to actually look into your life. A therapist should not be the one telling you what to do. We empower you to take a look inward and start to do
Mm-hmm.
that work too.
I love that.
Mhm.
Okay, so we're going to transition a little bit. And I feel like, so you were also like quoting scripture a little bit there. And I love that. I
Mhm.
love that because that's a value that I have, that
Yeah.
as Christians, we can talk about faith and mental health. Like
Mhm.
these should actually go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And I feel like you kind of have a similar value there. And so, what does that look like for you? How,
Mm.
um, growing your faith, but also in your mental health journey, like what does that look like for you? But also, like, how can that be helpful to someone else having both?
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that I can invite my no, not invite. I can have my faith also marry mental
Mm,
health and my healing.
mm-hmm.
Because it is exactly what I do as a clinician is I'm walking through the journey of healing with people, which is exactly what my heavenly Father does with me every day. He walks through
Ooh,
this journey with me. I'm not alone.
yeah.
And that's the beauty of it. That's like we're not alone on our healing journey. And so how I marry both, I call it like marrying my faith and as well as mental health, is simply trusting God that on this journey that I've made a conscious decision to go on as I heal, that He's with me. And He also will check me. Holy Spirit will check me in moments
Mm,
where I'm like, okay, God, I feel like we're good. I don't need to work any harder. Like we're good. And I will have moments where Holy Spirit would just be like, but do you remember how you spoke to your husband yesterday?
mm.
And I'm like, I just told him how I was feeling, like blank how I was feeling. And so in those moments, like I have to also Holy Spirit is there to like check me too, to
Mm-hmm.
help me, to guide me as I continue on in this journey too as
Yeah.
well. And that's how I have clients who come in who are believers and also are struggling with mental illnesses. And I let them know like God is not separate from this experience. He
Mm-hmm.
wants to walk alongside you in this experience. How are you inviting him
Yeah.
into this experience? Like I can pray and I can also take my medication,
Right.
because if you go to the doctor, you go to the doctor, get checked out. If the doctor tells you that you need your medication, you're going to avoid taking your medication because, like, oh, prayer heals. But at the same time, He's also a God that provides resources. So He's not going to
Mm,
send you out and be like, okay, you know what, just pray and leave it at that. He says pray, and then you also have to do the work. You
mm-hmm.
have to do the work. Like He provides you with resources. So when we walk around saying like, no, my prayer is going to heal my anxiety, yet like prayer works
Mm-hmm.
if you also work.
Mm,
Like you can't just pray and make that decision that my prayer is going to be the thing that brings me out of this journey, like brings me to my healing. No, you
yeah.
have to pray and you also have to practically do the steps too as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like, especially when it comes to healing, a lot of it is you're actually going to need to like put in the work. And
Mhm.
like, yeah, we can like pray about it and talk about it, but like, what if God is needing you to be obedient and go to therapy, or be obedient and take your medicine?
Mhm.
Like it, faith and works, we need both when it comes to
Yeah.
healing.
No.
100%.
Absolutely. And also even like as you were sharing that, I think of Jesus at the Garden of Gethsemane.
Mm,
Like he was in the time of prayer, and I felt like in that moment like he truly did experience what it felt like to be isolated. Like all the things that if you go and look at the symptomology for depression, like in that moment I felt like he really sat there and was like feeling all the feelings of someone who is going through a depressive episode of like I'm about to just surrender all of these things. He prayed, he was obedient because he
yeah.
knew what was to come. He knew the pain that lies ahead, but he
Mm-hmm.
still was obedient in that too. It's like simply like we can pray, but he also knew the works that had to go into that.
Yeah.
He's like, and sometimes the work doesn't look pretty.
Yeah.
The work is like in our depressive episode, it's me praying and crying at the same time. Like, Lord, I can't get out of bed and I'm just laying here, but I can still be praying in that. And he's
Mm-hmm.
allowing me to see, right? Recognize those depressive episodes that I'm experiencing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, like we can pray, but prayer without like, right? You like faith without works is dead. You
Mm-hmm.
got to do something.
Yep.
You can't just expect that he's just going to drop healing at your door and that's it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yes, he's going to provide healing because he's a God that's faithful to whatever he says he's going to do. He fulfills it.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you also have to work too
Yep.
in general. So, yeah, I'm
Yep.
like, oh Lord, y'all got to work. Y'all got to work. If you want healing, you got to work
Yep.
too. You
Mm-hmm.
got to be willing to do the work.
Faith and mental health go together. I'm
Mhm.
telling you. All right. So I started doing this little segment
Mhm.
called What Would You Say?
Mm.
Because, as a licensed therapist, I respect you and respect your expertise.
Mhm.
And so I got some questions that I'm just curious, like, what would you say as a
Oh, oh
therapist?
Lord. Okay.
Can be as brief or as long as an answer as you want.
Mhm.
So first, I want to ask, what would you say to someone who is afraid to start therapy, but they know that they need it?
First, I get it.
Mm.
It's scary.
Mm-hmm.
It's a scary thing for you to want to go to someone who doesn't know you and trust that what they're going to tell you is going to be helpful. And so I want to just first just honor that. Like honor that feeling and be like, it is okay to be scared.
Yeah.
There are many times where individuals will walk into my session and say, I was really scared about coming here today. I didn't want to come here. I know I need to do the work, but I didn't want to be here today. And I
Mm-hmm.
just let them know, I'm like, thank you for sharing that with me.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you're here today. And wherever it is that you want to start, you are allowed to start right there. I'm not going to push you to go anywhere that you're not ready to go to. So it's okay to be scared. Even as a therapist, to be honest, going to see a therapist, I was scared to go see a therapist for my own stuff. I knew I needed to do the healing because there were fruits that were showing up in my life that I was like, I do not like. This fruit is rotten. I don't want it.
Mm.
Like, no, I had to go and dig at the root of like what was causing me to have these fruits on my tree. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, it's okay to be scared. We welcome scary. We just will welcome you to just show up for yourself. And so if that's somewhere that you're at, it's okay to honor that. And I would even challenge you a little bit to show up to the space and actually say that. I'm scared to be here
Yeah.
because that's what the space is for. And any therapist would embrace you in, I'm scared to be here. Well, we're here together. Whenever you're ready to get to that scary space, we can get there.
Mm-hmm.
But it's okay to be scared.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that.
I love that.
Mhm.
Honestly, Tristan, don't be surprised if you get a bunch of DMs after this episode comes out saying, "Hey, how can I get you as my
No, you
therapist?"
are
Because
welcome. The door is always open. I love getting to hear people's story. There's just
yeah.
so there's I wish people would really embrace the beauty in sharing their story.
Mm,
Whether it has trauma in it or not, your story is still important.
yeah.
And even in the midst of whatever you're going through, it is still important. It is still so important to share your story
Mm-hmm.
because you never know that as just as much as clients think that like we come in here and you're helping me, actually most of the time my clients are helping me because they shed a light on things that I've not even dealt with. And that's the beauty of it, like just being scared, because we can both be. There's sometimes where I'm trying an intervention for the first time, and I will share with my clients. I would let them know, I'm like, this is my first time really trying this with you. And
Mm,
I just want to let you know that. So it's scary for me to try this with you, but I hope that you can come on this journey with me. And it's also okay if my clients reject it. That's
mm,
also okay.
yeah.
So just being like, if you're scared, go do it.
Yeah.
Like one of the the best thing that you could do for yourself is still just give it a shot, even if it's
Right.
scary.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Next question. So, what would you say to someone who is feeling burnt out for caring for someone else's mental health? So,
Oof.
maybe they're a fellow therapist, maybe they're a healthcare worker, maybe they're a mom, a caregiver, someone
Mm.
who is a loved one of someone with depression. How would you encourage someone who is a caregiver to someone else?
Whew, Rachel. I think this question hit home for me because I am learning
Mm,
on how to care for myself while caring for other people
mm-hmm.
because it's really hard. Um, I think one of the biggest thing that I'm trying, I don't want to say I've gotten perfectly down, I'm trying, is extending compassion, extending a lot of self-compassion to myself when I feel like there are days where I go into work and all I hear from the first client I start seeing to the last client is trauma. And I have to be okay with when I get in the car, if I want to cry in my car because it was heavy, that it's okay.
Yeah.
And also, one, giving yourself a lot of self-compassion. Two, having someone outside of the person you're caring for that you feel comfortable enough that can, you, one, sit with you and let you just process. And that could be a therapist if you wanted to be another therapist, or just having a group, a community of people that you can lean on that just pour into you
Yeah.
when they see like, oh, Tristen, your cup is real low. What are you doing? And for me personally, submitting myself to the one person who knows every part of me, which is God. Like, I have to be willing to say, you know what, God, I don't know how to carry this load. It is heavy by myself. Can you please help me?
Yeah.
It's also being willing to submit to God as well. The burden, like we are asked to submit our, like to leave our burdens at his feet. Like, we can also do that. So if you need to cry, if you, for moms who are taking care of all the kids, they're pulling your attention all day. If you get the moment where you need to sit on the toilet and have yourself a bowl of ice cream because all the kids are asleep, please do so. And do not guilt yourself for how many pints of ice cream you're eating because you need it. So get all the ice cream you need. And for my fellow therapist, it is okay. We are doing a lot of hard work with a lot of people. We're walking alongside people with a lot of heavy stuff. So if you need to sit, binge watch, because I binge watch some stuff. If you need to sit and binge watch a show for a little bit of time just to get yourself just grounded, if you need to do yoga, whatever you need to do, find that thing that truly fuels your soul.
Yeah.
After serving other people. Like, we get burnt out serving because we don't take time to care for our soul. And we don't take time to just take a break from all the hecticness of what we're doing and ask for support. Really, just like compassion, ask for support, and spend some time in prayer.
Yeah.
Because that's me. For me, that's what I'm learning. That's working for me. And trust me, it's different for everybody. And so I don't want to say my way is going to work for everybody, but whatever it is that works for you, whatever makes your soul happy, please do so.
Yeah.
Because you're taking care of a lot, and burnouts are not fun. They are not fun at all. So take some time and care for yourself.
Yeah. I appreciate that. That was a word for someone.
Yeah.
And someone is me. For sure. Okay, this next question, I want to talk a little bit about grief and loss, because I know that is something that we all deal with and experience in this life. So what would you say to someone who is experiencing grief right now?
I feel like this question is definitely more personal for me this year because I feel like I've experienced a lot of grief, right? Whether it's grief in relationships or just grief with a person you love that just passed. One thing I know we all hear the saying is like, grief is nonlinear. I want you to, one, just be okay with where you're at in your grief. And do not allow other people's experience of grief diminish or dismiss your current experience. That it is okay if I wake up one day and I'm angry. And we all talk about like the stages of grief, right? And we go through like anger, you go through like the original shock, and then it's anger, then you have this like bargaining of like, okay, what could I have done different? And then we get to acceptance. Grief can be in different parts where it's, I can fully accept the fact that this person is not gone does not mean that I'm not angry at the way that this person left. And so, wherever you are in your grief process, I just want to um, encourage you to take your time. There's not a destination that you need to get to. And know that however it's showing up for you daily, that's okay. So, one thing that I would say to someone that's experiencing grief right now is that it's okay to be exactly where you're at.
Mm.
Take your time, and don't feel like you need to rush it.
Yeah.
Experience what needs to be experienced in the very moment that you're experiencing it.
Mm-hmm.
That you don't need to rush out of that experience to get to the next stage. And you're not going to go through the stage in order,
Mm.
and it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
You do not have to go through the stage in order. No matter what someone tells you, they're like, okay, well, you need to already be over it. It's been 3 years, it's been 4 years. I get it. But again, make sure that you have support, because grief is also not something that we can always do alone.
Mm-hmm.
We have to have people that we lean on, that are just there to listen, that are there to hug, that are there to cry with you, that are just there.
Yeah.
People that are okay with talking about the depths of grief with you and are not trying to rush you out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Just be okay with sitting in it,
Yeah.
because it's a loss. And a lot of times when we are going through such a loss, we want to just be okay with being in that particular space.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would just encourage you, just be in the space that you're in, seek out support, and let yourself go through this process without rushing through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good. I know we got a little bit heavy here.
Mhm.
I do have one more question though
Okay.
before we end this. Do you have any last piece of advice to someone who is in the beginning stages of their mental health journey? Because it is a journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One thing I would say is that, just like exactly what you stated, it is a journey.
Mm-hmm.
And another is, do not compare your healing process with someone else's.
Mm.
And take the time that you need to process through every part of what you're going through, whether it's with anxiety, learning about your triggers, your childhood trauma, going through, going through transitions in your life. Being the fact that you have decided to show up for yourself, that in itself is already you taking the biggest step in your healing journey.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that you acknowledge, and then now you're showing up to meet with a stranger that eventually will now become someone that's in your life at a point where you start to hear your therapist telling you stuff while you're going through stuff, because I know I
Mm-hmm.
have those moments. But I just encourage you to just continue to show up for yourself and know that it's going to get messy. It's not a pretty thing. It's going to get messy. But the beauty about that mess is that there's always glory on the other side of it.
Yeah.
You get to enjoy a full, whole life just because you decided to show up in that seat that day.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in the beginning, trust the process. It's not pretty, but trust the process, because there is glory at the other side.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good, Tristen.
Yeah.
Before we go,
Mm-hmm.
let the people know, where can we follow you? Because they're going to want to follow you after this.
Good Lord. Yeah. Well, as I get my life together on the whole social media thing. But honestly, you can follow me on at Tristen Speaks on IG, and what I post there is just silly things about me as a clinician, and also just encouraging post of, like, whether it's my stories, just being encouraging of other
Mm-hmm.
resources that you can go to. And as I build that, you guys follow me while I
Mm-hmm.
learn to build
Yep.
whatever that social media platform is going to be.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's just speaking into mental health, and also just a little bit of, no, not a whole lot of God, a whole lot of God in there, sprinkled with mental
Yeah.
health too as well.
Yeah. No, I love your Instagram handle, Tristen Speaks, because as you have witnessed today, when Tristen speaks, the world has changed, okay? No,
No,
I
thank you.
truly I appreciate you coming here
No.
and pouring out your wisdom.
Mhm.
I've gotten to experience that in the real life, so it was an honor to get you to bring
No.
you here and to share that with the world a little bit.
No, it was an honor to be here. And just thank you so much for just trusting this with me, trusting this platform with me, and just being able to allow me to come into the space and just to share space with you. And I'm so excited for what you're doing
Thank
for the people
you.
and just I'm not to say for the culture, but um no, it's just like I really truly appreciate what you're doing and just being able to be a voice that speaks boldly. And also as someone who is a God-fearing woman. And so I just like love that you just continue to do that because the world needs that. We're done with the chaos of hearing everybody else speak, but we need the people of God to speak up
Yeah.
and just be the voice that's needed today because a lot of people need it. So thank you so
Mhm.
much for allowing me to come in
Thank
here and do
you.
that.
That means
Right.
a lot.
I appreciate you.
All right, y'all. If this episode touched your heart like it touched mine,
Mm.
I encourage you, screenshot it, go ahead and share it to your Instagram story. You can follow me at He Heals Podcast, Tristen at Tristen Speaks. I got myself a little confused there at Tristen Speaks. Tag us and let us know. Like we want the support. We want to know how it impacted you.
Yeah.
That would mean a lot. And we will see you in the next episode.